Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. In this video is to bring you a closer look at the bomber number BB5000 450A 652. This is a almost very common hinge. It has one feature to it that makes it less common, although I think it should be the standard, would be my opinion. And that's what this hinge looks like. And off the top, right off the bat, you might notice what's different about this hinge. So this is what makes this different is the belt and suspender approach when it comes to security options. The A in the part number means that this is a hinge that features a security stud and a non-removable pin feature with that set screw that's down in there. So the bottom line is when the set screw is tightened and the pin of the hinge has a groove cut in it, so that set screw will seat in there, all but preventing you from driving it out. Even if you were to drive that out, you close that door, what's going to happen is, if you watch here, that stud is going to come in and fill that space. Okay, so let's imagine that you drove the pin out. Okay, try to pull the door out towards you. You know, still nothing because of that security stud that's interfacing there. Now, having said that, if you're able to, of course, successfully pry the door apart to the point where you can make the hinge barrels, the knuckles of the hinges, physically leave themselves so that you can get the door out, okay, great. You know, at that point, you know, the hinge has certainly done its job of not coming apart. So the belt and suspender approach, so to speak, is really what sets this hinge apart completely. Now, I've tried to drive pins out in set non-removable pins, and while I wouldn't say that it's impossible to do it, because it's not, I would say that it's incredibly difficult. You have to make a commitment to destroying the hardware to get that out. But, you know, what a surprise you get when you drive the pin out and the door still doesn't come out. The door still won't come out. Now, that security stud is actually, I don't know that it's an old carpenter's trick, but I was told many, many years ago, you know, by a carpenter, he says, you know how to make a cheap non-removable pin hinge? And I says, no. He says, you know what a 16 penny double head nail is? I says, yeah. He says, you drive that into your jamb, that double head nail, and you drill a hole in the edge of your door, voila, you have a security stud feature, so that every time the door closes, it engages, you know, the double head aspect of the nail. And a 16 penny double head nail is a double head nail because they're meant to be pulled back out when you're building forms for pouring concrete, like you're doing a curb. You know, you're building a form into which to pour that concrete. Double head nails are what's used, and double head makes that easy to take your claw hammer and just pull those nails out. So this is that concept. In essence, that's what this is. Okay. Now, this manufacturer also has a maximum security stud, which would be the same stud on both leaves, except that it would be sticking out of the back of the hinge. The concept there is now you'll drill a hole into the preparation of the frame and the door so that when you attach the hinge, those studs are sitting into those holes. Same concept. Okay? You might drive the pin out, but you're not going to separate the door out of the leaf because, well, you know, why? Well, because what you have is the leaves are mechanically engaged in the frame, and again, the only way to do that is to separate these knuckles apart from each other. You know, and you've really got to move those, you know, you'd have to separate them by at least the diameter of the knuckle, you know, so almost basically 5/8 of an inch. And if you can find 5/8 of an inch of room in a door and a frame, you probably aren't going to bother with the hinges to be able to get in. So, having talked about the A part of the part number, that's the 450A. The A defines everything about what we just talked about, the security feature. That pin can be removed, of course. You just have to loosen the set screw. You loosen that a few revolutions. It's not necessary to remove it from the hinge barrel, but you'll be able to put your pin punch into there and drive that pin out. Why you would want to do that, I don't know. Why you'd want to do it otherwise, for no reason, but why I would do it is the way that I hang doors is I attach my hinges to both the door and frame. I have the pin pulled out, and then I, you know, get the door to the frame, and then set the pins. That's why I would remove them, because I find it easier to attach a hinge when I don't have 110 pounds hanging on it. So let's move on. Now that we've talked about the special feature of this hinge, let's talk about the standard features of this hinge. So this is a BB5000 hinge. That means, in just dissecting the part number, that means it's BB ball bearing. There are 2 bearing packets on this hinge because later on in the part number we're going to get to see where this is a standard weight hinge, or 134 thousandths leaf thickness. Now the 5 in the part number, and by the way, the BB is available as an LB as well. An LB would be a 3-knuckle version of this hinge. Okay, this has 5 knuckles. An LB would be a 3-knuckle version, but an LB is going to have concealed bearings. You won't see these bearing packets. 3-knuckle, considered by, I think, everyone, a more aesthetically pleasing hinge. It's a cleaner look on this hinge. It just simply is. In fact, I can grab one and show you the difference really quick. I just simply grabbed the one that was closest to my desk. Yeah. So this is an LB hinge from Bomber. Now this pin will be tapped down, and that will be completely flush like you see down here. It will be that clean, flush tip on both sides. So without me setting that pin down, I think you might agree that it is certainly a cleaner look. The finish happens to be satin brass. This is actually satin brass finish over a solid brass base material is what this one is. So that's an LB. This also happens to be a heavyweight hinge. The leaf is just thicker, but that's an LB 8000 is what this is. An 8000 meaning 3-knuckle. So let's back up. You can do a BB or an LB. An LB is going to be the bearing construction like this, where you don't see the bearing packets. You can do BB or LB in 5-knuckle or 3-knuckle, but generally when you do an LB, you are going to see that linked to a 3-knuckle hinge more often. All of the spring hinges from Bomber are 3-knuckle, but you can order it as a 5-knuckle as well. The logic goes together, however. If you are trying to conceal the bearings of the hinge, you're probably going for a cleaner look. Maybe look at the 3-knuckle hinge. Most consider it a cleaner look. Others, would say, I don't really care anything about that. It just drives the cost up. Sure, I get that. No doubt. But I think arguably it's a cleaner look. Now, so the BB can be done as a exposed bearing packet. It can be done as an LB, which would be a concealed bearing packet. The 5 in the part number means 5-knuckle. You can see why we call it 5-knuckle, and you can see why we would have the 3-knuckle version. That would be an 8, where the 5 would reside. Then we have a 0 in the part number, and that means full mortise. You can see from the swag on the hinge leaf, right at the tip of my finger, that bend that's there. When those leaves are brought parallel, they're meant to be mortised flush to the edge of the door and frame, and that makes it a full mortise hinge. You wouldn't surface mount this hinge because the swag on the hinge leaf would prevent you from laying that hinge flat on the face of your door and frame. The next 0 in the part number means standard. This is not a raised barrel hinge, it's not a wide throw hinge, it's not a swing clear hinge, it's not an anchor hinge, it's a standard hinge. The final 0 in the part number means 2 things. It means that it is made of steel, and it means that it is a standard weight hinge, and the target size for that, of course, is 134 thousandths. My caliper tells me 0.137, basically, on those leaves, so certainly well within tolerance. What comes after that would be the size. This is a 450 hinge from Bomber, and that means 4.5 by 4.5. The height is the first dimension on hinges. Okay, the width is the second dimension. Okay, it runs opposite of how doors are sized. With doors, the size is the first dimension. The width, I should say, is the first dimension. Why is that the case? I don't know, but to me, as you think about why once the first dimension would be the first dimension, both, of course, are incredibly important to know, and they're important to know for different reasons. But telling you the first dimension first helps put into context the rest of the description that comes after that. With a door, if you told me that it was a 7-foot door, okay, great, it's a 7-foot door. What's the width? That's what I want to know. When it comes to a hinge, what's the width? I'm initially less concerned with the width. Tell me the height first. That's what I want to know, because the height tells us so much about the hinge, in fact. And the reason that the first dimension in either instances might be more important, but in particular as in regards to a hinge, is it tells me, I said, more about the hinge, or a lot about the hinge. It actually tells me a lot about the door itself. So if it's 4.5 inch tall, a lot of things are, if you tell me the hinge is 4.5 inch tall, things are already running through your head. Okay, 1.75 inch thick door, most likely. Standard size, it's not an unusual size, and its width. And then as you go further with the rest of the part number, things start to fall in place. If you tell me it's a 4.5 by 4.5, now I'm thinking, okay, regular hinge. If you tell me it's a 4.5 by 4, now I'm thinking, okay, could be a regular hinge, maybe, could be aluminum storefront. If you tell me it's 4.5 by 6, now I'm starting to think, oh, obviously wide throw. What's the reason we're having that? But I do believe it all starts with knowing that first more important, or at least give it to me in that order, important dimension of the height. However, both dimensions need to be thought about importantly, because either can be manipulated to best suit the requirements of the opening. Just in summary, if you're dealing with doors that are 3'6" and wider, 4.5 tall is not the right hinge to use. You should be thinking of a 5-inch hinge, because you've got a wider door. You need more plate attached to the door and frame to keep that door in the frame, and it's well demonstrated that wider doors put more stress on hinges, especially that top hinge, where 70% of the weight of the door is actually borne on that top hinge, or borne by the top hinge. Okay. And when it comes to selecting the height, you'll want to also realize that the height of the hinge also has a lot to do with the thickness of the door. Meaning, if we're talking a 3.5 inch hinge, you are saying to yourself, okay, this is probably not an 1.75 inch thick door, but if it's a 4-inch hinge, it could be 1 3/8 or 1 3/4. If it's 4.5, it won't be 1 3/8 because you really can't fit that hinge. So it's 1 3/4. It could be 2-inch, but when you get to 5-inch wide, could be 1 3/4, probably 2-inch or 2 1/4. Now you get the scenario. You get the concept of what we're dealing with when we talk about height and width. So in our 1 3/4 thick door, you're really going to be dealing with either a 4.5, 5, maybe a 6. The width is then going to become important, where it'll be either 4.5 inch wide, maybe 4-inch wide, but really not 5-inch wide, because the hinge just gets too wide to fit onto that thickness of door. And the height is directly related to the weight, to the width of the door, to the volume of use on the door. You've got standard and heavyweight, 134 thousandths or 180 thousandths if it's a 4.5, or you've got 140 thousandths or 145 thousandths or 190 thousandths if it's a 5-inch hinge, in standard or heavyweight. Oh yeah, standard or heavyweight. So you've got the caliber of the thickness of the leaf, and then you've got the height, and those two work together to handle the door itself. I just did a project for a company in New Jersey, and their name is literally synonymous with companies that provide the service of going to your location, picking up cash, and then delivering it to wherever it has to go. To the bank, I imagine. I don't know where that money goes. They have a pair of doors, 5 foot, unequal leaf, 3/0 and 2/0, 14 gauge steel stiffened. Yeah, 5-inch tall, heavyweight. Even though it was just moderate use, 5-inch tall and heavyweight. Because you've got a 14 gauge door, that's steel stiffened. It means it has steel channels on the inside of it, and that will all conspire to make it quite heavy. Now, was 5-inch required versus 4.5, just a 4.5-inch standard weight? I'm going to have to I would have to say technically no, but given the idea that a 5-inch tall hinge is about 20% more effective at doing its job than a 4.5-inch hinge, and I literally have a door that I can't order a door any thicker than 14 gauge and steel stiffened, I'm going to say yes, that a 5-inch was the right thing for me to specify, even in a moderate use. And that's just what we're dealing with. So let's talk a little bit more about the width, but let's talk about the width and move to the screen view. So here is the item that we're talking about, and our conversation regarding width is, is best discussed like this. If you have a frame, okay, and you have your hinge, your vertical axis of pivoting, got your leaf in here, you have your door, okay, so the dimension from the vertical axis of pivoting, this dimension here, and the point of determining or recognizing that axis of pivoting, this is what I'm saying. You want that as close to the center of the thickness of the door as possible. So in a situation like we've kind of drawn here is when we take that door and we put it into a 180 degree position, where now this leaf is over here, now that dimension becomes kind of something that we should think about. We already said we want it as close to the thickness of the center of the door as possible, but we need to think about what's happening inside of here. So if you have a situation where you are wrapping the wall, yeah, you don't need a 4.5-inch wide hinge. You need a 4-inch wide hinge. Okay. If you have a situation where you are butting your 5 3/4 hollow metal to an 8-inch block wall, now you need to look at it. Now the formula to look at it is door thickness minus hinge back set times 2 plus clearance plus inset. Door thickness, subtract your back set. Let's say 1 3/4, deduct 1/4 inch back set, that's typical, times 2 is 3-inch. Let's say that your clearance is whatever. And our prior example where we were butting or wrapping the wall, our clearance is 0. There is no clearance because there's nothing there. Plus 0 plus your inset, and that dimension from the face of the frame to the face of the door on a typical application is about 3/32, also known as negligible, but not always negligible. So very tiny, the amount that's here. You then go to the next largest commercially available width. So you really need a hinge that's about 3 1/32 wide. What's the next width available in a 4-inch tall hinge, a 4.5-inch tall hinge? It's 4-inch. Now this is where the clearance is where your numbering is really going to change. If this is 2-inch or 1.5 inches, okay, now you're talking. The inset is very, very significant when there is an inset. Aluminum storefront, that door can be flush to the face of the frame, or it can be in 1/8 of an inch. Hollow metal is always going to have a tiny inset, but you could also have an application where you've got an 18-inch thick wall. You literally have a wood frame that's 18-inch, and the door is in the center of that opening. So your inset is 7-inch or some huge number where you need some really huge wide throw. But the condition also is, are you going to go to 180 degree? Do you need to open it up that far? You may not. You might only be going to 90 degree and that's it. And at that point, I would say it's best to bring your hinge to as close to the center of the door as possible. So in talking about width, there's more to it than just pick a width. And I have been recently in a DHI class where the instructor said, you distributors, we only give you the 4.5-inch wide because that's what you all want. And his point was, it's not necessarily the best hinge. And in many instances, it's not going to be the best hinge it'll be the best hinge only when the clearance and the inset define it as being the best hinge for width. If you had a wraparound installation and you put a 4.5-inch wide hinge on that, it would be marked wrong on a, test, so to speak, of that hardware set, because 4-inch would be the right answer. So in order for the hinge to do the best job as possible, you want to bring that to the center of the door as best as possible as well. Let's now go to the manufacturer's page here, where we can look at the how to order matrix. But before we jump there, let's take a look at the cut sheet, which is here. And the cut sheet is really a template. And the template just shows us some dimensional properties of what we're dealing with on this, what is called a template hinge. So we're using the term template to describe the dimensional properties of the hinge rendered in a two-dimensional, format. But the location of the holes is also known as the template pattern. And what that means is any manufacturer of hinges that will make a hinge to a template pattern will have these same identical locations. That makes life easy. You don't have to worry about if your bomber hinge will fit into your Seco frame with hinges that were Stanley. If it's a template prep, it's a template prep. But what else is nice about this document is that it will show you the swag line, or the dimension from the edge of the leaf to where that bend starts. And here it is. We're dealing with a BB5000, so we're going to be in this row on our 4 or 4.5. So 1 7/8 is what we're dealing with. Columns change as the base material changes, but the dimensions don't. These are in a different row because these are wide throw hinges. Okay. Now back to that link here, and that's going to allow you to open up the link to the manufacturer's page where you can get to the how to order matrix. And I find myself referring to this document all the time because I like to know where Bomber wants me to put the part numbers. Okay, so we've got our bearing design here, 5000, and you can see examples, not all, but in many cases all, of how the part number will change as your requirements change. So if I wanted this same hinge in a heavyweight, all I'm going to do is make it a BB5004 to give me a heavyweight steel. If I wanted it to be made of non-ferrous, I would make it a 2, or at least a stainless steel. I would want it to be a 2. 1 tells the factory it's a brass or bronze-based material. Size is over here. We're dealing with a 450. That means a full mortise, 4.5, 4.5. You might want to refer to this table because it's also, it's not necessarily always common sense of what Bomber chooses as their nomenclature for the size. They're not having you call it out as 5 by 4.5. They've got a code for all of that, okay? So use the code is the bottom line. And if you're unsure what the code is, reach out to us. If I'm unsure what the code is, I will reach out to them. Door options, if there are any, beveled or square edge door or a short leaf, that's all important. Beveled or square edge, if you're dealing with swing clear hinges, yeah, they need to know what those hinge swag line bends or angles are going to be so that the hinge works correctly. Tip and pin options, you can do decorative tips on these hinges. It's unusual, of course, but you can. I've done heavyweight solid brass hinges, 3 knuckle with a 5/8 radius that were 4.5, 4.5. That's what the client wanted. That's what he got. Security options, we're dealing with our A, removable pin and security stud. Okay, that's the belt and suspenders approach where you put them both together. Custom options, anchor and slip-in options. We'll skip over this. If you're dealing with an anchor hinge, you don't need to be watching a video about hinge 101. Electric options is the same. Then you have your finishes. About finishes from Bomber, they are incredibly proud, as they should be, that they can do about 33 different finishes. And I've been to their plating plant, and I've seen the process work. And they can't do every possible finish in the world ever. but no one really can. But Bomber is going to get you started with darn near 3 dozen options on 3 different types of base material as well. That manufacturer's page will allow you to pull up the product catalog as well, and that's a handy trip so that you can view. Now this document's really handy because you can do a find function on your keyboard for BB5000, and you'll get to the page, the cut sheet basically, of where it is. It's a very common, it's probably their most common part number, but you'll eventually get to that page. You can see the steel, the sizes that it's available in, up to 5x5. I guess if you want to go to 6-inch tall, you're going to go to a heavyweight hinge, which would be like our BB5000 4. Is that what we had said? Sure. Let's go back and check that out. Okay, yeah, they can do 6x4.5 and a heavyweight BB5000 4. Okay, you got a super, super heavy, high application door. Don't be afraid to use a 6-inch tall hinge. That's my opinion. Okay, back to our BB5000. 5001 is brass, 5002 is stainless. Sizes available, options available. Speaking of other hinges now, you can really use this catalog to great effect to help determine what other options are available, but it really goes back to the how to order matrix. Okay, this is what you're going to really use, and it's this first section here that's going to keep you moved towards the products that you need. You can then get that product and search it in their catalog and come up with the requirements. Let's move on further into the video and review the last portion of the part number, which is the finish, and we'll do so on camera. Now, as we move to the end of this video, this hinge is 652. That means that it's 3 things. It is made of steel, as we demonstrated earlier, that it's satin chrome with like a lacquer over it, so it seals that off. This would be considered the most durable of all artificial finishes, meaning you're doing some process, some chemical process over the base material. A natural finish would be this hinge as a BB5002 450 630. That would be solid stainless with a brushed finish. I believe it was a 5002. But in terms of finishes on steel, you're going to be able to do prime coat, 601 prime coat, 601 bright black japanned, 603 zinc, 604 zinc dichromate, your brasses, your bronze, your chromes, your nickels, satin polished, oil rubbed. They're going to have 10 finishes on steel for sure that you can do. Don't think they're doing any powder coating. Is my relatively recent trip to the factory is telling me in my memory. So, black being all the new rage in terms of a powder-coated finish. The good news is Bomber can do black. It would be their 601 finish. They'd call it bright black japanned is what it would be called. But if you wanted white or red powder-coated hinges, I don't think Bomber's going to come to the market with that capability. Really nice quality hinge. The last thing I'd like to point out to you is that logo. And right above it, it says Made in USA. That's a fact that Bomber is quite proud of, as am I to represent them. Other manufacturers' logos, I have seen they're starting to add USA on it. That's a part of their logo. Doesn't mean the hinge is made in the United States. It may be. And if it is, it doesn't mean that the steel they're making it with came from the United States, or that the box they ship it in is domestically manufactured, whereas in the case with Bomber, all of that is true. Thoroughly domestically sourced. That's a fact that Bomber is quite proud of. Bomber's able to do projects because of that very sole, unique capability of domestic manufacturing that everyone else cannot do. What else is in the box? Some screws. It would be fairly typical to get all wood screws and all machine screws. Be mindful. Don't take for granted getting all wood and all machine screws. Best practice and proper detailing of your hardware would be to tell us what screws you want. All wood screws, half machine screws, etc. This box is also going to include some shims. well, some cardboard. They not only isolate the hinges from each other, but they're also literally hinge shims, is what they are. So if you need to move your door around a little bit after installation, they send you off some cardboard that will allow you to do that. Be mindful, if it's a steel door, don't use cardboard shims in a steel door. It's not permissible. Use steel shims. It's permissible to shim a door, a fire door, so long as they're steel shims. This hinge is perfectly, thoroughly, 100% approved for use on fire doors. It doesn't have a UL stamp on it, and that's because it doesn't require one to be. The testing laboratories don't require that it be stamped on a hinge, but a hinge is pretty much the only piece of equipment that I'm aware of that does not require that. However, if you wanted to have that paperwork on file, that would be a call to Bomber and ask them for their listing certification with the testing laboratory, and they will be able to provide that without any trouble. Nice clean finish on the hinge. Okay, nice quality product. Again, unique because of the belt and suspenders. Security stud along with the non-removable pin as well. It does impact the cost, not drastically so. So if you feel that you have an opportunity for some tampering on your door, get the security stud in addition to the non-removable pin. That link to the manufacturer's page down below will allow you to review not only all of the Bomber products that we sell, but a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to that full product catalog. If you know the name Bomber at all, you probably do for spring hinges. It's, in fact, the brothers Bomber in about 1876 or so literally invented the entire category of spring hinges. Any spring hinge that you've ever seen is because of the Bomber company. Fun fact, the ownership of Bomber is the husband of the granddaughter of one of the two originating founders. Any questions on the BB5000-450A in a 652 finish or any other Bomber product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.